for illumined life to be birthed into form. I am the truth. I am the light. Illumine, beloved divine.
So hello there everyone, and welcome to the second part of the video in which I will talk about different light experiments and experiments with energy that are being held at different levels of creation. First, again, I want to reference you to the previous video in which I talked about these experiments and light beings and false light, as well as my Ascending the Dark training mini course here on YouTube. So this is like a starting point, because I know a lot of people, especially in the light worker movement, are not fully aware of these things. And there's a lot of talking about ascending through the light, and of course that's the truth. The Lumen Union is ascending through the unification of different aspects of who we are and our bodies of consciousness. But ascension in that regard also means spiraling upwards and then spiraling downwards in order to witness all of life and all that's happening with the expanded perception. And this is not witnessed, especially in the New Age movement, because it's been so deeply infiltrated by the dark forces, truly, and a lot of forces of control, which keep people in this locked mode, and they're sort of become unavailable to keep on expanding and growing further. So these are some of the things that really need to be addressed and spoken about, because a lot of people don't even know or are slightly aware that this exists. Things like energetic control, implants, dark implants, collective implants, collective belief systems, in terms of the hologram here on Earth. And when you start mastering yourself, this is something you simply need to know about. This is something you deeply need to start studying through your own body. You need to bring the light of illumination through every aspect of your body. So again, I will talk about my experience as well, but firstly, I want to mention a few general words, and I want to go deeper in this video because I also want to explain how to recognize these beings and false light representation, and how to actually train yourself in this, because this is not something we can actually avoid. In a lot of cases, this is a part of our training. People might think and brush this off by saying, well, I'm a starseed, no way that can happen to me because I have high awareness, or my consciousness comes from this highest density. We all come from different levels of densities, right? We're all different density beings. And this means that our bodies, although they look physically the same, they're actually not the same. Like my body's not the same as some other person's body, because it responds to my body of consciousness, which comes from a space of density as a light being that is different, than what most people might embody. So what this also means, because ascending happens in a spiraling way, is that my experience, so that's why I'm sharing these things, can eventually become a parallel experience of someone else. So when they come to a certain spiral of their own ascension, they might come across similar initiations and training, because that's what they are. These are truly initiations. So from a level of something that we're witnessing and become first aware of, right, we only see the immediate result of what that is. We might start panicking or start fearing what this is about, and this is where the understanding of this control and forces of oppression or darkness needs to come in. So that's why I recommended Susan's channel and her work with the darkness and explaining it, demystifying it, right? So don't just go off saying automatically, this no way it can happen to me, or because what I'm talking about, because it happened to me, it cannot happen to anyone else, right? I noticed, there's still a filter in the human consciousness that everyone has, basically, who hasn't been trained through their own experience into this yet, because I can see that people don't even acknowledge that. I've shared this experience with some people, like briefly, some people I know. Perhaps they're not in that level of depth of ascension yet. They haven't done the Lumen Cognition Mastering and all of that, but simply it's like a part of them doesn't just accept that, like really accept that, because the moment you accept that as a possibility, you feel into it. You don't just brush something off and say, well, yeah, whatever, that's just your job, it's your training, it doesn't really concern me. that's what I notice in people. It's like there's this collective filter in people that, you know, when I share something so deep, if someone hears it, that's like not at that level of understanding these aspects of life, or they know they exist, but they just don't go into them themselves, or they're not at that level yet of becoming aware. So it's almost like they brush this off like instantly, and they won't have a feeling reaction to it. It means it's kind of like they bypass it. It's like this filter, it's like is a part of our collective matrix, is meant to keep us thinking like, yeah, you know, it's happening, but it's always happening to someone else or somewhere out there, you know. And we always think in all the things like that something can even happen to me. You know, when I was at the top of my world, when I had a period in my life when I've done so much of illumination within me, my body was strong, my hair was thick and long, and I really felt great. I used to climb the highest mountains, as I've shared with you, and brought you actually to some of those mountains with me in my videos. And this is the moment in my awareness, in my spiraling space, where I felt this is it, you know, and this is how you feel. It can go lower than this, you know, you can just go higher and higher. And in truth, ascension is not like that. So first I'm going to say, why are these star individuals or star-born people or star seeds, especially light beings who are actually, when I talk about light beings, I don't just mean beings aligned with love and light and truth, right? When I say light beings, these are beings who in their realm of density, they no longer, even if they're a star seed, they no longer have a physical aspect to it, right? You can be a star seed from, let's say, another planet, but you still exist within a certain density that resembles form, let's say, like we know four-dimensional form here on Earth and things like that. When I say illumined star beings or illumined beings, these are beings, you know, they come from higher points of density and experiences. So naturally, just for them to be in the human form is very difficult. And just recently, in one of the channelings, the transmissions we had, Jesus, the Christ, Yeshua Christ, also told us that light beings will always experience tremendous challenges in the physical body, just because they're luminous beings, and it's difficult for them to maintain form. So, you know, that's one thing. The second thing is that why they're actually more susceptible, it's because we're more interesting to the dark controllers and forces of dark, because we hold not just specific knowledge, but we hold specific modalities within us, like higher forms of inner light technology that are a threat to this development of our planet and where it is now. So my experiences actually began way back in 2010, but they were not as instrumentally deeply impactful as they later became. So I'm going to reveal to you something that, you know, when I contemplated on this and where it all began and went too deep, because that was actually when I heard the word, when I meditated with my group, and the word came through. It was, there's a transgression. And I was like, what does this even mean? And I went to Google it, right? And it comes out that there's like an offense of something that's not really allowed. And this is what happened, because in my experience, even though I had an agreement with these beings, they didn't honor it and they went against, so they stepped over that which was valued within that agreement. And this is when divine intervention needed to come through for me. So when I say these beings were a part of my reality, and I specifically consciously remember since 2010 having these visitations and what I used to call light activations, because that's what I believe they were, even though I never felt pleasant when these were occurring. It never went, it's like, it wasn't like as deeply impactful right away. You know, it's kind of like the dark controllers on Earth when they're modifying a lot of our reality, you know, slowly adapting people, getting them used to artificial intelligence more and more, first through just external devices, and they become more advanced, and eventually more and more AI technology within you, right? You're giving up your organic sovereignty and life force ability to bring forth life in creation, right? To breathe with life, with Holy Spirit. And basically, it's like eradicate Holy Spirit fire from with you, or from like without you. I don't know how to say this, okay? Sorry, guys. So the thing was that, you know, it gradually started building up and becoming more intense. So last year, and I've discussed these meetings on my Patreon group, I've shared specific two last ones that I remember. One was in May. The other one was the most detrimental one, which occurred around November, December timeline, and which is when I needed to finally get rid of that influence and realize what's the contract, what's the deal, where was the transgression, what actually occurred. And I'll explain more, right? But when I looked into it, when I viewed the timeline specifically, it was actually right. The transgression occurred after I was trained within my own light family team into the pulsar, galactic pulsar light body technology. And it has a lot to do with the way you reshape the body, because that's what we do. Our team of light, we work with life force dispensations and how they influence life in creation, like reinvigorating, bringing more life, bringing a deeper vitality to the cells, because we already know the impact into the cells and the cellular structure and how they need to communicate vitally with each other. They impact the DNA, and the DNA brings back the information, so there's like this constant communication. But this is like an even deeper component, which leads the human into a higher new form. So naturally that became dangerous, and this is when the interjection occurred. So around the fall, in the summer I had this training, it began. And then in the fall, I was doing it, and it was about this particle acceleration. And when I was doing it, specific times when I felt my light family, I always cried. I was in the middle of the process and I started crying. I'm like, oh, sorry guys. They're like, it's okay, just breathe, right? And the way you can recognize these beings who are not of your family of light and who are definitely not within the domain of Christ light, right? They live in that separate ideology of what light is. So their imprint is different, and I'm going to explain it. But when they come, you're not going to feel pleasant. You won't feel that love that makes you cry, that makes you feel that instant connection. So don't fall for it. The reason why they can do that is because you have a blind spot somewhere, and one of the reasons is because when we incarnate here, we do that through the astral plane, and the astral plane, although it's being cleared out a lot within the ascension of Earth, it still exists, and it's quite a battlefield, right? And the astral field is not just a field of the feeling side of our dreams, but it's also the plane of dark controllers. So these dark controllers and these entities existing in the astral realm, especially the lower astral planes, they're being impulsed by beings who rank up much higher and higher, because I told you, Lumen Union has this, right? The polarity meeting and merging each time at each new level. So when you imagine a dark being, a controller at the creation level, you won't see them as an entity. It's not the same as astral entity. They're also in a way a light being. However, they're using the element of light to control. And their imprint is, sometimes it's very subtle, and you will still sometimes feel while you're doing the work for the light. That was the imprint they were constantly leaving within my body, right? They were trying to reinforce and implant my body with, was this belief that you need to always bring forth more light and struggle for the light, and there's a complexity of this understanding that not a lot of people know. And my group teaches organic ascension, which is simply a natural acceleration within a greater and greater field of potentialities, right? It's like your body's naturally absorbing it and more and coming into greater and higher density, truly, right? A greater awareness and higher density. But the way light family does this is always through love. Even your own soul family would never reinforce these light activations upon you unless you make the consent and you ask for it, and usually asking 3 times and making the statement. Even sometimes, when it's, sometimes you're asking and pleading, but the answer is no, because let's say you're not ready for something, they would reevaluate that, and there's always a consent, right? There's always a collective consensual agreement. However, with these beings, they don't care. They don't have any regard or respect for the human body. For them, the feminine aspect of life, which is the body, the feminine aspect of ascension and organic life, is just serves as an experiment, because that's what they developed into. They've kind of like splintered and went off stray, speaking galactically, right, from a higher density viewpoint, and then this kind of descends and becomes different aspects of what we call dark beings and dark entities that exist at different levels. So you might say these demons, they're very fragmented aspects of them, just like we also have a mistake. Sometimes we might call an entity a demon, but it's actually a fragmented aspect of the human soul, right? Hasn't come into full union. So they're like, sometimes we call them ghosts. And again, even these have different degrees of fragmentation. So the work that most people are doing, first they have to start defragmenting and unifying their own soul. And 3 years ago, I recommended Soul Integration book by Sarah Kelly, I think. There's other materials about this and how you can do this work. But whatever way you do it, you always need to do it through not just through a book and guidance. Sometimes people do workshops, courses, work through healers, with healers. But you always need to invoke your own family of light, because they're actually the main first bubble through which you're expanding. And it's like your own bubble of existence. So your family of light always loves the body. These beings, they don't. So in my case, they just wanted to hijack my body. They wanted to use it for their controlling experiments. And not just that, they also wanted to, and they did, build these implants in me that would keep my consciousness only at a certain level. I couldn't expand further and further. That was the difficult thing. So these implants exist, and just because they're not physical, most of them are etherical in nature, but they do impact our physicality, and sometimes in a tremendous way, especially if you're a very sensitive being. People who are denser, they don't feel as empathically, and like if you're a very cognitive being, you will feel like a slight change, like a princess on a pea, that story. She was so pure and sensitive. She could feel it right away, no matter how many mattresses were they. It's different with people who are not as aware and sensitive. That's why it will impact you even more as a star being. So I'm going to go back to how this influenced me. So back in December, I told you before, and again, I think people just brush this off like, oh, it's just a part of the process. Well, it was a part of my process. It was a part of my agreement, and I had to go through it in a way. It was an initiation, but at the human level, it still sucked. It was terrible. I wouldn't want this to anyone. At the human level, there was suffering, tremendous suffering, and I was never a suicidal person. I always loved life. I was life-loving, life-giving. But this was for the first time in my life. I felt I'm going to die, and because I felt so terrible in my body, there's nothing else I wanted more than to actually die. And when I tell this to someone, people are like, they don't even respond to it. It's like we have a filter. If someone tells you something so critical, you just don't respond to it. I've noticed this because I've mentioned this to a few people who they're kind of like somewhere in between, and they're like, they don't even like really grasp on it. Like, wow, really? There isn't even this response like, wow, really? What is this? What happened? It's like, just, okay, that happens, brushing it off. It's a part of the collective in the hologram of the matrix for us to become numbed down to these things, desensitized in a way. But they do exist. And on each level, they would be like gradually implemented, right? So the more you're trying to expand on each level of Lumen Union, you're going to break through another aspect. You will meet aspect of a position. Let me just call it like that. And this was for me because I made such a huge breakthrough, and because I was trained and initiated into the pulsar, galactic pulsar activation technique, which was an inner modality, how we use the intelligence of the light body and particle discharge to accelerate this process and to rejuvenate the whole body, because my body was very damaged and abused after these abuses, from these beings, and I wasn't even aware. But when this final abuse occurred, when this transgression occurred, I didn't know what that meant until I had this real story. And I don't talk about this at such depth or at such length. I've only shared it on my Patreon page and with my group, which I feel really comfortable in. But I'll tell you that when this last visitation came and I felt every surge of that energy and how they were scanning me, what were sending in me, these frequencies, and I even managed to escape through a star portal, which was a very interesting experience. Somehow I managed to escape through probably even worse things. But the thing is, after that, I had a period which lasted for a week, and my periods usually last 3 to 4 days, and I only have pain the first day, the usual cramps, and that's it. I had pain 7 days or more. I think it was even more, like constantly, every day. I couldn't do anything but just laying there in the couch feeling so much pain, because something that probably they wanted to seed into me, like my body was just having such difficulty, was like resisting that, like totally. And that's when I thought I'm going to die. That was the first stage. And then it was moving through my heart. I thought I'm going to have a heart attack because my heart had such palpitations, and I never have those, except for the occasional when you're really happy and giddy, and that's it, you know, when you're doing your heart expansion. And then it went further, you know, and then this deactivation of that ended now here in my head and my teeth area, my jaw, my head. I've been experiencing these tremendous pains and, you know, contractions, and, you know, for so long now that there comes a time when I'm in great doubt, and I tell myself, I don't know if I can do this. So if I can heal myself, if I can manage to pull through, because what's happening now, I managed to break free spiritually. But this is what it gets tricky. We have a human body. My body, and even my guides and Jesus Christ told me, like, my body is now severely suffering from these consequences. Like, physicality has been so drained, and all this that they were sending like throughout the years, and especially with the last impact, because it was too strong, right, for me, for the current physicality. Because we're supposed to expand and ascend through grace, not forceful impacts of these energetic currents. And the thing is, it left a deep imprint, like, and my body's like trying, like, it's still breaking free from that physically. And now I'm guided into this natural healing, self-healing, that it's quite a process. I wasn't steady with it first, because it's quite a devotion. You have to commit to it full-heartedly. So I need to do this process with the brain and brain reconfiguration, and with the particle discharge through the brain, which I do with the pulsar. And then that's the first stage, because I need to do it 3 times a day now. The second part is here, going with the heart portal, being with the love of the mother, just being, just absorbing, just holding the space of that love. Because what that also did, this impact, this interjection, interference really, it kind of caused me to no longer feel that love that I always felt for the beloved, and this cultivation, it was just gone. Because the love for the self at that point was gone, right? And then the third aspect is within the womb. Like, that's what I do in the evening. That's what I was told doing in the evening. Just, let's say you do a few yin yoga poses, hold the energy, being held within the womb. So you have the brain, right, that sends the signals, because there's this great body of work by Bruce Lipton, right? He did this study which shows the opposite that, like, most science, mainstream science was teaching. So he's saying how the cellular membranes correspond with the DNA and giving information, and then the brain that holds the visual image, holds the picture, gives the information, which then goes through the blood, right, through hormones. It influences our body. It tells the cells how, where to divide, you know, the growth occurs. So if you're holding a vision of something in the brain. So this is kind of the process I need to do now to totally restructure, reconfigure my body. This won't just be done on its own. That's why it's difficult. So in a way, I see this was my initiation. No one actually could predict where it could take, because, you know, there's free will, and that's what people don't get. They think that just because they're this light being or star seed or star being, they're untouchable, and that's not true. So when you exist in higher levels of density, so beyond the fifth dimensional space of embodiment, the light and dark sort of polarize in a way that they no longer, you know, the dark can't manipulate in such a way that's direct, that we're experiencing now in 3D and 4D levels. But it still exists, right? There's different beings, you know, overlords that have their higher counterparts, like majestic beings, you know, like Lucifer, for example, right? There's many beings, but Lucifer being one of the very famous ones. So it's like people think it can happen to me. I can be influenced, and I have a protection of my team. I'm always protected. This is something that we don't have a full knowing of if we're just thinking about it in this way. Because we have to remember we're a physical component here. We are a physical human counterpart. When even the most highest consciousness would enter this human body, it becomes vulnerable. It goes through the solar portal into this solar system, into this plane of Earth, in plane of reality, this Earth. It goes through the astral plane, and it's like you're imprinted through all of these aspects. So all these aspects can imprint you back. So these impulses that, let's say, these astral beings would receive, right? They're being impulsed by, like, even higher aspects, right? So creation is always aspects within aspects within aspects, and it's like wider each time. So the darkness, which I explained in the previous video, that was very obvious, very out and about, and we know how it acts, it's different than the darkness with this so-called false light. It can reflect the light, and it works with the element of light, but it uses light in an inappropriate way. If you know, that's what led to the downfall and fall of Atlantis. So a lot of people who are choosing the path of the dark, let's say those who worship and follow the path of Lucifer, they don't necessarily think Lucifer is an evil being or evil Lord, because Lucifer is also known as the great deceiver. It's like illuminator who actually deceives by portraying itself like, I am the most luminous being, like, you know, the queen, king in this universe. But in that belief, when people join like an agenda and start to worship that and giving it energy, giving the aspects that are Luciferian, giving it that energy, what they're doing is they're not aware that the darkness always wants something from you. You always have to pay your homage or pay something to it. That's why, you know, Susan explains this beautiful. I don't want to go into it. It's her video. I'm going to link it below about the darkness. And this is what they don't understand. Like, that's what it's called. You literally become a slave to the darkness. The illumined light doesn't want anything from you other than you being your beautiful divine self. We went through this in the Ascending the Darkness video, right? So the illumined light wants you to expand to your highest possible potential. You don't have to pay dividends. You don't have to serve it because they need you to serve. Like, even when you come to Earth, no one forces you. No light being tells you you're needed in this service, so you have to go. You choose it because it's also part of your growth, because you want to learn how to expand in your luminosity by being of selfless service. It is always your initiative. So even when I had the agreement or a contract with these beings, it was my choice. I wanted to have this experience. I wanted to break through it. I wanted to break free from it and also teach others how to do it. That's how badass I am, you know, in a way. But there's an element of the human self that's also vulnerable. And that's what people don't get when you tell someone something like this and they just brush it off. Like, I will see that. I'll say to someone, you know, I almost died this year. Like, oh, yeah, what's new? Hello? I just told you I almost died. It's like, people don't take these things seriously. It's like there's something wrong in the filter, the way this information comes through, because there's like in this collective matrix hologram, people are desensitized, and even people who are aware of the matrix, they're not aware of where the matrix still kind of and how it impulses them. So in this book I showed you in the previous video called Affinity by Maura Kuan-Yin, I would really recommend it. There's lots of exercises of light you can do. There's one process, and I've read through it for my Patreon group. We've done this ceremony together for releasing these contracts and agreements, and also agreements with the dark, because a lot of souls made agreements with the dark not to harm them because they had bad experiences as light workers or channelers or, you know, bearers of light. So it was too much for them. So they kind of like said, oh, please protect me and don't do anything to me, but I'm only going to grow to this extent. I won't keep on expanding further. So when you are now in this life and you want to experience full organic ascension, you're literally going to have to break free of those contracts, because if you're only going to grow up, and, you know, eventually you hit a wall, and that's what happens. And you call that a blockage, but it's actually, it's your signal. It's your body's, your soul's, and your oversoul's signal that you need to do the work of researching, and it takes place in the body. So you would either be guided to a specific healer who does that work. I know Susan does lots of this work with implants and all of this, and she's amazing with that because she knows how to do it, because she understands darkness. There's a lot of people who might charge you a large sum of money, but they're charlatans. You know, people doing like this, sending you energy, sending you Reiki. This is not something that you do with Reiki, because Reiki still exists in terms of light, right? The translation of light. Working with contracts, signature agreements, first, of course, first and foremost, yourself. You have to have total desire to break free from every single thing that makes you not who you truly are, that, you know, kind of prevents you from being the full sovereign integral being. You have to have a complete desire that has to be your priority. If it's not your priority, if it's still going to a job, 9 to 5, this and that, it has to be your priority to be free of everything. And fearlessly, like we've talked about in the previous video, I had to have this fearless nature that I will continue to expand. I'm not going to go pay homage to these beings and say, oh, you've done so much to me, now I'm afraid to go deeper because I'm afraid of you. No, I'm not. You know me. I'm always like, I'm going to tell you something, what I do. I go out, I have this platform somewhere there in the forest. It's a clearing space, and what's above you is just these pure mountains. And I start yelling, and I start telling the energies, like, this is who I really am. You don't play games with me. Not like they would tell you, you don't play games with us. But I tell them, they will not mess with me because I know who I am. And this takes guts. And yes, because you take that next step, perhaps something will come along, because in each level of your expansion, you will meet opposition. That is what Illumined Union is, right? I'm not fanatic about this. I'm passionate because that's the truth. And just because someone is not experiencing it now and might brush it off, doesn't mean it won't one day become a part of their reality, because they will come to that point of the spiral. So, sometimes my sharing will be misunderstood or misinterpreted through people who don't understand it. That's okay, Sometimes even I don't understand certain aspects that I'm going through until I'm on the other side, and that's normal. That's how it's done. But I'm leaving a trail. That's what's called trailblazing. I'm leaving a mark. I'm leaving footsteps. How to do this? Because anyone can, right? So going back to these contracts and agreements, first you need complete desire to be free. Then you need to know and understand not just the light, but also the darkness, because you can't break free just with invoking the light. There are certain things and elements that you have to deeply go into. And that's why the whole last year I was trained into how Luciferian consciousness works, which is basically the consciousness of false light, the bright star. That's what Lucifer means. And it's like the way it entices people in, and that's why Susan explains so beautifully. People would say, look, all these Luciferians, they're rich, they're millionaires, they have all of this. Wow, why wouldn't I join, right? It's much easier than all these light workers who are sometimes poor or struggling to make the ends meet, and they don't even have their groups. They're all spread around the planet, and these people are really structured in their groups and secret societies and cults. And that might kind of force someone of a younger soul nature to join. But the thing is, once you're in it, you're hooked. And it's very difficult to come out. Very difficult. Because the darkness always wants something from you, and eventually wants your soul. And it does get it, because you do give it that way. And you might think, well, people who choose that are the only ones who are in that way being manipulated, or sell their soul to the devil. It's the term. No. You can be the purest being, and that's what I thought. I was always so pure, I was just loving nature, loving life. I barely ever did something terrible to anyone. It's like I was always like this. It was just me. It's normal. It's natural for me to be this way and to be this loving. But it was a part of my training to not be just this loving, because that's what makes you naive. To experience this, to experience the opposition. Because only then you know what the Christ is. Because the Christ, like we spoke about in the previous video, is pure benevolence, that it's hovers above all of that. It doesn't, choose sides. It's not prone to something. It is the Christ. It doesn't create darkness. It doesn't join darkness. But it allows, it understands, and with that pure compassionate state, it keeps on expanding the field so that more soul beings can enter into this state of Christ consciousness and their own embodiment. So it is quite a journey, and all those of you who are definitely resonating with star being, volunteer souls, things like that, you are most how to say that, most prone, right, to understand this information, but also most affected, because you're the most interesting, because you hold lots of information. And once you start getting to a certain threshold, when you become dangerous to the status quo and the matrix and the whole hologram, you will be visited. Not necessarily in the way that I shared. This was my experience and my agreement. as someone on the path of Christ, you will have to understand both the dark and the light. And the path of Illumined Union, which goes like this, on every level of density, there is separation, then coming back into union. And that's how galactically, right, if you look at the DNA helix as a galactic strand, right, on each level of density, Illumined Union has to be achieved. So it goes from below to above and above to below. Just like if you imagine whole of life beginning at the highest point of source and dividing and coming down. Now Ascension is literally coming from this, the most rooted state, climbing back up. And on each level of this integration of Illumined Union, you will have to meet both ends and make that conscious merge. Okay, I'm going to be teaching that in the Cosmic Christ course one day. I don't know when, because my life is now dedicated to this rejuvenation, regeneration, re-entering into new life within my body. And I'm going to share more in the Light Body Intelligence on Patreon. We're going to do this mini training. If you're ever guided to join at any time, you know, if you just want that, that's fine. It's very important. This is probably the most important thing at this time. It will also help us with building greater immunity in the body, because we're going to surpass levels that where just darkness still has its grip, has its hold and its control. Because once we surpass it, we can assist a lot of people, you know. So it's not just for us. We don't just do this for us. A lot of us have made these sacrifices to assist others and helping them to liberate themselves and break free. So anyway, that's that. That's for today. I hope you enjoyed the second part. I think it went a little deeper than the first one. That's how it is. Always going a little deeper. Remember the greatest motto there is. There is always more. There's always more to life, because that's what life is. So thank you, beloved fellow traveler of the heart. I join you in the sacred space of love as always, and I'll see you next time. With love, wisdom, and power as always. Bye.